Using AI to close the research to practice gap is our episode topic. My guest is Dr. Justin Fontenot, Editor in Chief of Teaching and Learning in Nursing, Adjunct Lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, and Associate Professor at Tulane University School of Medicine, which is working to launch its own nursing program in the fall of 2024. Justin is a fellow in the Academy of Associate Degree Nursing. So let's get started.
Welcome to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast. BRG is a global consulting firm that helps organizations in disputes and investigations, corporate finance, and performance improvement and advisory. BRG's healthcare performance improvement practice offers multidisciplinary services to healthcare organizations. We focus on implementation with innovative, independent, and data-driven solutions. In the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, we discuss improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. For more information about BRG, please visit thinkbrg.com. Now here's your host, Nick Shimolewski.
Justin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we get into our episode topic, can you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
I just recently moved from my hometown where I lived pretty much my entire adult life and worked my entire career, and relocated to the greater New Orleans area to take on a really new and exciting role, opening up an accelerated baccalaureate degree in nursing program at Tulane University, housed under the School of Medicine, which is quite interesting dynamic that we have. So far, it's going really well. I am a doctorally prepared nurse, but I am also in the midst of transitioning from the DNP, taking a bridge program to the PhD in nursing science, getting ready to enter my dissertation stage at Texas Women's University. So I'm also a full-time student there. And I am the proud editor-in-chief of Teaching and Learning in Nursing, which is our premier society journal for the Organization of Associate Degree Nursing. A wonderful job opportunity and experience. I have a really unique job situation now, and I reside here on the North Shore of New Orleans. I absolutely love the New Orleans area, the New Orleans community, and enjoying learning a little bit more about the people and the culture here, because my culture and my heritage and my ethnicity is Cajun. I bring all of those things to the table, and it's been such a fun ride and a fun career, and I can't wait to see where things go from here.
So you are an associate degree nurse by background and then have since gone on to advance your education.
Right.
There's
Yes.
a lot of doctorate prepared nurses that start with associate degrees.
Interestingly, we didn't have a whole lot of data on associate degree nursing, but our organization took a stab at trying to find out more about the actual practice entry. And after a research study that was done in 2020, so it's a little dated, it's dated by 4 years, so the numbers changed, but nearly half, like 49% of people who are pursuing nursing as a profession start out in the associate degree pathway. And because Odin is a national voice for maintaining that pathway, because of its accessibility, right? I grew up in a very small rural town in a lot of poverty, and my family couldn't afford to send me to a 4-year school. So I had to go to community college, but Odin supports that entry. And then we have practice partnerships so that we can influence educational progression. We're encouraging people to not stop at the ADN, but it's a great option for people who want to get out into the workforce right away, want to not have to spend as much money to get that RN. And a lot of people find that once they get employed somewhere, that employer will pay them to go back to school for their BSN. So it's like a win-win for a lot of reasons. And people just don't realize that nearly half of the nursing students that get their RNs start as ADNs, but a good portion of them are BSNs now and even higher. And there's also the idea that diversity comes from the associate degree program. Because it is more accessible, you have people from all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds that enter the nursing profession. And that's really just good for us as a profession, right? We need people who know what it's like to live in a community of poverty, right? Because when I graduated with my ADN, what did I do? I started working directly with my community, and who understood them better than someone from that area, right? Than someone, and granted, I don't live there anymore, but I spent a large portion of my career caring for very vulnerable populations in rural communities who are culturally Cajun, ethnically Cajun. We have our own culture, our own language, the whole thing. And it's really interesting how the ADN is impactful in that way. In fact, there's plenty of studies that tell us that once ADNs graduate, they remain in their community for the long term, as opposed to BSNs where they may remain in their community for a year and then they get away from bedside practice because they have that higher education. And so they become leaders, case managers, work from home, all sorts of opportunities open up to them that don't open up for the ADN. So I'm really passionate about advocating for that pathway of nursing because it's important, it's critical.
Thank you. This episode is a continuation of a series of episodes that we're doing on artificial intelligence. In season 3, episode 6, Paul Osborne talked about artificial intelligence and the future of healthcare. And then in season 3, episode 11, Dina Brescher from Mednician talked about using artificial intelligence for better nursing decisions and better patient outcomes. You recently authored a Spotlight on Leadership article in the Journal of Nursing Administration, also known as JONA, and it's titled What Nurse Leaders Need to Know About Artificial Intelligence. The link to that article is in our episode description. Before we talk more specifically about AI and the research to practice gap, let's start with the more broader question of what does every nurse leader need to know about AI?
As someone who was a nurse leader prior to getting into nursing academics, one of the biggest challenges that I had, and I think a lot of nurse leaders can relate to this, is you have cultural things that are very specific to your community that you care for. There's also things that are happening around us that are sometimes without our outside of our control. For example, the global pandemic. I know that whenever I was a nurse leader before I took a full-time job in academics, I was working in a rural area as the administrator and director of a family-owned, very small local home health company. Our program was unique in that we did have a number of adults who most people would consider vulnerable for many reasons. I was also working in that role at the height of a global pandemic. One of the biggest challenges that I continued to have in that role was making sure, as a nurse administrator in a home health role, we've got all sorts of responsibilities, right? We're responsible for our budget, we're responsible for our revenue, we're responsible for all sorts of things, including patient satisfaction and quality improvement. And so one of the things that I recognized quickly is that because of the nature of the types of patients that we were taking, that maybe other agencies weren't taking, people who were just getting out of the hospital, who had been severely impacted by COVID in both physical and emotional arena. Those individuals were having some incredible challenges at home that were largely, in a lot of ways, social determinants of health. So we saw things like people who really needed to go from the hospital to maybe a skilled nursing facility, but the insurance either wouldn't approve it or they didn't have the money to pay for it. And so we were their next best option. But what kept happening was patients kept falling because their needs weren't getting met in the home. So we had an incredible fall rate. We had other issues that kind of came up. So as a nurse leader, in my mind, I'm thinking, how do I solve these problems? And my training in my graduate master's degree, which is what I had at that time, I knew that in my training, I could correct some of these problems by implementing evidence into practice. But one of my biggest challenges was that I didn't have access to evidence, right? So my hands were a little bit tied because I could only access open access articles. The company I worked for wasn't big enough to pay for database access, right? So there were all these challenges to, even as an administrator who had, first of all, been trained as a nurse leader, because my master's is in nursing leadership. I had been trained to solve clinical problems using evidence, but here I was not able to unleash my training in that role. And I think that this is more common of a leadership problem than we might imagine it to be. And I know that we have some very large hospital systems that are connected with academic institutions that do not have these challenges, which is why their quality of care is often better than some of our other hospitals who do not have access to medical libraries, academic health centers. We're talking rural hospitals, rural institutions across the country where nurse leaders are really grappling with constant patient quality issues that a little bit of research and evidence could possibly solve. And so, one of the things that I came to quickly realize as I started kind of dabbling with generative AI, right? So, AI has been around for a while. We have different forms of AI. But the newest invention that we have is that generative AI and the power of that system. And so, of course, I'm here working as a student, trying to just grapple with passing statistics in a graduate program. And I'm thinking generative AI might be a really great option for me. But of course, initially scared to death of it. But once I started really investigating and prompting and learning and reading and trying to inform myself, one of the things I came to quickly realize is that AI has a lot of power specifically for guiding leaders. And in terms of extracting data from prior research, that's one thing I want nurse leaders to know about. So I point out a strategy, and one of the interesting things about where we're at with AI right now is that it's piecemeal. We have a lot of different companies and institutions and organizations that are coming out with many different tools, all serving different purposes, all using that generative AI approach. But for the most part, it's piecemeal. So that Jonah article is really my way to communicate to those nurse leaders that are working in hospitals, that are seeing patient challenges over and over again, that we know those patient challenges are well studied in the literature, but they just either don't have the time or don't have the resources they need to access and unleash that power. And I want them to know that AI is a really good open access option for them.
And your article is a quick read. It's only about 2.5 pages. You detail two strategies of using AI, and then you also talk about, and this is a very important topic, of handling the ethical challenges with AI. So can you talk a little bit about ethical challenges in using AI as it relates to nursing leadership?
We already know that it's a challenge, right? So I think a lot of folks often question, why do nurses need that graduate level education in their leadership roles? What does it matter, right? Or why do nurses need education in evidence-based practice? Not just in evidence-based practice, but also in the ability to translate evidence into practice, right? Because leaders have a unique responsibility to ensuring the safety of the patients that we care for under our care. So, one of the things we don't want to do is take a bit of shoddy research work, or maybe not even shoddy, but research work that's unfinished, right? We have to start to understand research trajectories. We have to understand, okay, I'm dealing with patient challenge number one. How much research and literature is available in that area? And is this a growing and developing area? Or is this an area that's well established and I just need to tap into it and figure out what's the best option for me and my unit? But we also know that when we implement evidence, we can make mistakes, and those mistakes can be quite costly, right? So those mistakes could lead to us doing unintentional harm. And again, a lot of times these things happen When we implement something too quickly, or we don't have enough background and information, or we don't have the ability to see all of the moving parts, as a nurse leader, we need to understand how to pilot these things and decide how these things are working. We need to have that approach of change management where we're dealing with our staff and helping, and they are helping and assisting, and they are part of that process. They are taking ownership of it. They're bringing up the things we need to tweak and change as we make these practice-based changes. So when we think about using AI, because it can be inaccurate, we need to be aware of that. We need to know that when we look up a specific topic, especially if it's a growing or evolving topic, we need to make sure that when we extract that data, if you look at section or strategy 2 in that Jonah article, we've already done a thorough search with the help of generative AI, some sort of chatbot, whichever you like to use. ChatGPT is a good one. But then we move over to that elicit, right? Because we went through and we found our articles and we uploaded it either into elicit, or now there's SciSpace. And these programs are really trying to work on their accuracy. But what we're doing here is we're extracting the data from our search. So we went through and we found everything we needed and we downloaded it, and then we're putting it in this system so that we can quickly extract the data. Because one thing nurse leaders don't have time is to sit around and just read dozens of articles. They also have staffing to contend with, they have meetings to contend with, they have budgets that need to be done, they have all sorts of pressing issues that come up. But what we really need to make sure is that when we are taking that faster route to extracting data from these sources so that we can use that to inform ourselves to make decisions, practice-based decisions, we need to make sure that data is accurate. We need to make sure that the system is giving us the right information, because generative AI is new and it's still up and coming, and there is bias and there is inaccuracy. And so I say this to caution, but not to fear away from it.
So we've tiptoed right into our episode topic by talking about the ethics, which is using AI to close the research to practice gap. And we just mentioned it a little bit in strategy 2 of one potential way that you can use this. I'm curious, under strategy 2, given the constraints that exist on things that are not available through open access, what does that look like? Because you're really just able to use AI from what's in the public domain, or does AI have some access to things that are behind a firewall that I would not have access to if I'm looking on Google Scholar or things of that nature?
This is where we get into the ethics of it all. If I open up Elicit right now, and I mentioned Elicit at the time when I wrote that article, things are changing so rapidly, but at the time when I authored that article, Elicit was still open access. So now Elicit has a subscription service. You have to pay for it, but it promises to increase the accuracy of the data extraction. One of the things though, and again, if you're a leader, you may not need to go to ChatGPT and do a solid database search on your topic and download all the documents and then go to strategy 2 and use Elicit. You may be able to go straight to Elicit, right? And Elicit allows you to type in a PICO question. If you have a really good PICO question, something that's a practice-based issue in your unit or in your facility, and you formulate a really good PICO question and you put it in there, Elicit is going to use multiple data points to answer your question with the literature. You will be able to see all of the papers that it's extracting data from. You will not be able to access that paper if it's behind a paywall, which makes it difficult. Because if it's extracting data from something that you can't go and access and make sure that extraction is accurate, then you might want to mark that one off your list. But it will extract data from papers that are behind paywalls. So as long as you can confirm that. Now, here's the interesting part. There are ways to do that, because even when a paper is behind a paywall, you can at least get the abstract of that article. And the other thing you can do is reach out to the corresponding author, because when you read the abstract, usually you'll see the corresponding author. It'll give you a contact address, usually email. And you can contact that author and say, I am a nurse leader. I am trying to solve a problem. Your paper came up on my AI platform. I just want to see the actual article. I read the abstract. I would like to see the actual article because I want to make sure that I'm getting it right, what you're saying in this paper, because that might be the paper that changes your opinion about the way you're currently practicing and how you want to start driving your practice. So there are ways around it, but it's really easy for a busy nurse leader to trust and rely on that AI platform as, okay, it's saying this, it must be correct, right? And if you use Elicit, you can see that you can extract multiple things out of those papers. So you can extract the number of participants, you can extract the intervention information, you can extract the results. You can even extract, there's a column where it says question-based extraction, which means it's going to attempt to answer your PICO question that you asked Elicit based on what that paper's findings are. And then you can download all of this into an Excel spreadsheet. So I do recommend that you use this procedure because it has the opportunity to quickly, one, locate evidence, two, extract evidence even if you don't have access to it. Three, the things that you really need to get access to, you can find a way, even if your institution doesn't have database access, because you can reach out to the authors. You can download all of this extraction of data into the Excel spreadsheet. And then I fully recommend that you take that further step to not just make an independent decision, but meet with your evidence-based practice council, which you should have on your unit, hopefully a group of trusted nurses who understand the challenges that we're currently facing and who can offer advice and opinions. And you can project that data on a screen and discuss it as a team. What part of this do you think is going to help us navigate these challenges? And I know that it sounds a little bit like a lot of work to do these kinds of things, but I do want to emphasize that we continue to have a huge research to practice gap, and we have to figure out a way to close it. And prior to generative AI, the only way that we had was our traditional methods, where nurses in leadership positions may very well be trained to do these things, but they just don't have the tools and resources. Now we have the promise of a new tool, but we still need to proceed with caution. But I still think that we must try and attempt to use these tools, because if there's any way that we can close that research to practice gap, our patients are going to benefit more from that overall.
Okay, so I have a couple of follow-up questions, and trying to be sensitive that resources clearly do vary based upon being in a large academic medical center or in a very small rural hospital, or potentially even in a care delivery system outside of the hospital setting, such as home care or something to that nature. The first one around Elicit, you've mentioned it multiple times. If I'm working in a health system or a healthcare company that doesn't have subscriptions to journals to begin with, why would I think that I would have a subscription to Elicit, especially since that's now a paid thing? What's the cost on that? And how do I get access to that when I can't even access the journals?
Yeah, so great question. So I'm not on here to sell Elicit to anyone. I want to make that clear. I have no commercial ties to Elicit. What I will say about Elicit is that all it takes is a free account. So all you have to do is set up a free account. So if you're a nurse leader, you can use your institutional organizational email to sign up for a free account on Elicit. And when you sign up for a free account, the way Elicit's paid model works is that you're given a certain number of credits. And so for each credit, you get so many attempts at pulling and extracting articles and data. Chances are, if you are a nurse leader who, let's just say you're dealing with patient falls, major issue, and that's just something that keeps coming up. You've tried everything, you're beating your head against the wall. I know the feeling, I've been there. You can open Elicit at no cost, ask a really well-developed PICO. Again, you want to make sure that you communicate with your team and you work with some experts in this area if you're not too sure about it. Because with the free version of Elicit, you can't keep repeating the search because you'll keep decreasing your credit. So you need to have a solid question so that you can use it free of charge at least that one time. And so what I say is test it out. And I think we can all be honest with each other to say that we know that accessing up-to-date evidence and nursing literature will always advance our profession, our practice, and ultimately our patient care. So I would suggest that. Again, there are plenty of other ones. I haven't even tried them all out. I use SciSpace a lot and it's free. Now, it's not as, I'd say maybe it's not the same system as Elicit. It's different in many ways, but it has some unique features that Elicit doesn't have. So I would say do some searching. Don't just settle for one. Look at all of your options. Try to figure out from whatever company you're working with, what is their accuracy rate on data extraction? Because you want to know that. You want to know if there's a margin of error before you get started. And make the best decision with a team. Don't just do all of that by yourself. Have your team look at it, have your team discuss it. As nurse leaders, we should always be including other people's opinions and insight so that we can truly make this come to life for us. So there's many different ways that we can approach it.
Many health systems have Microsoft Office 365 subscriptions. Some other health systems use the Google Suite, and each of those have AI generative tools. I'm more familiar with Copilot just from my experience. Wondering if either of those generative AI tools can be used for the same, and what your thoughts are on that as opposed to the two ones that clearly seem to be more research based.
Yeah, so that's where I caution again on using chatbots. Pretty much everyone has access to a chatbot at no cost, no matter your institution. So Copilot is one, Gemini is another, which is formerly Bard. ChatGPT is one. ChatGPT has an open access version, 3.5. Everybody can use it. And then you can pay a very small amount for 4, which is supposed to promise more accuracy. Even with 4, it is very much a challenge to use a generative chatbot to extract data from any source. I would caution there. I don't necessarily see the future of speeding evidence into practice with chatbots. As I point out in my article, using a chatbot is a great option if you're trying to design a formal search strategy. So a nurse leader may not be looking to design a formal search strategy. They may just rather go to one of the platforms similar to Elicit or SciSpace where they can ask their PICO question, get some good quality papers, and extract the data and then decide on whether or not those things can be implemented into practice. For the purpose of a nurse leader, they may want to shy away from the generative chatbot. Now, where I find the chatbots are really good is designing search strategy, which for me, as someone in now academia, that's a very good option for me, right? Because I may actually want to do a full systematic review of the literature on a topic that I see a gap in or that I need to do something with. So I will turn to the generative chatbots to say, this is my PICO question for a systematic review of the literature. I need you to string together a search strategy for me, and I need you to give me the syntax from whatever databases I choose, CINAHL, Academic Search Complete, PubMed, and it will do just that. And it does a beautiful job with that. So basically, all the things that I would normally do with a medical librarian, I can do with the chatbot. But what you do not want to do with the chatbot in any way, shape, or form is ask them about an article and see if it can give you the information back. Because we know that all the chatbots, no matter what platform you're using, are tied to ChatGPT. And we know because ChatGPT powers things like Gemini and Copilot. So what we know is that it has an issue with hallucination. So it will just make something up that doesn't even exist. So I extreme caution in that area because that platform was not built for a researcher. It wasn't built for evidence-based practice. Neither are most of the tools that we have to our access, but Elicit, SciSpace, and other platforms like that are specifically built to help research workflow. ChatGPT and other generative chatbots, please use caution in those areas. If you ask the chatbot a question about how you might handle falls and what does the literature say about that, you'll see. And if you ask it a follow-up question to cite the source, it'll cite those sources. But when you search for those, they won't even really exist. So that's a big issue. And that's why I designed the two strategy system, because I don't want people trying to use a generative AI chatbot product to influence practice.
One of the other things, so I think we need to be careful about is the use of data for or using AI in analyzing data. I know that's also a future component or enhancement that a lot of people are looking at, where you could throw a set of data or table or something into a chatbot and asking it for assistance in an analysis. As nurse leaders start to work and disseminate that down or encourage some of their subordinates to use these tools, probably need to be very careful about what we're using in which different platforms. And so can you talk a little bit more about that?
I would caution anyone against using generative AI as a way to analyze data. You really have to be careful. The reason why is you really need to understand how machine learning works. Yes, we have this wonderful technology, right? But how does it work? How does that technology really affect us? When you think about machine learning, it literally is what it says. The machine learns based on what we tell it, what we input it, right? When we talk about things like bias,
Including all of our biases that we're putting into it, the machine is giving it back to us.
yes. And not only that, but it's storing it and it's learning from the whole global population that's using the system. So if you put patient data in there and you ask it to analyze it, there's a chance that patient data could come up in someone else's chat prompt questions.
Oh, wow.
And you do not want that.
Right.
I don't upload anything into generative AI systems, okay? Rarely do I never do that because because what you put into it, it has the authority to keep it and then learn from what you put into it, which means you can catch your information. Maybe somebody's prompting for similar topic in Canada, and that person may end up coming across some confidential information that they shouldn't have access to. So you shouldn't upload anything in the generative AI chatbots. If you want to analyze data, stick to our tried and true techniques. Have your institution get you SPSS, have your institution get you Excel. Most of them do. So you can do simple like frequency calculations and percentages and those kinds of things. If you need to do some complicated statistical work, partner with an academic setting. And that's one of the things that I think people don't do often enough. We're over here in academia, siloed away from the practice environment. But if a nurse leader were to contact me and say, I need help with this, or I have a question, or I need access to software to analyze the results of this little pilot run I'm doing on my unit, I don't know any nursing professor who's going to turn you down or put you in touch with someone who can help you with that, so that your data is protected and so that you get the tools that you need in an accurate way. So I think we are going to enter a period of time down the road where AI is going to be a reliable data analytics tool for us, but we have a way to go before that happens. And in our current environment, generative AI is not the way to go to analyze data. And sure, you can type and say, can you figure out, if I give you such and such, can you figure out the p-value of a two-tailed two independent group t-tests, and it could do that. I don't know about the accuracy. I haven't done that before, but I certainly wouldn't upload like a spreadsheet of data into there and say, here, figure it out, because you have no idea where that information is going to go. And you have no idea to make sure that it's very accurate. But we know tools like SPSS, Intellectus, several other R is free, right? So your local university can connect you to those things. And most people in practice have a connection with their academic institution, because we all need clinical sites. Chances are we already work with you. But what we don't do is get out of our little silos and make use of those resources. And as a nurse leader, that's how we have to start thinking.
And you mentioned Intellectus. For those that are not familiar, Intellectus Statistics is a wonderful tool to use, especially for someone like me. I don't have a PhD. It takes a lot of brain power for me to think about how to process some advanced statistical questions. And Intellectus is great for any DMP that's out there, or even any master's prepared nurse that's out there, of really just, if you understand what components of the data you have and what question you're trying to answer, not only can it do the analysis for you, but it can even do a write-up for you. It's a wonderful tool.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a huge fan. Again, I'm
Yeah,
my
I'm not
best self
endorsing
being
either,
biased.
but still, it's a great tool that's out there.
It
I-
really is. Now it comes at a cost. That's another
but
thing,
there's also a free trial period as well if you've never used it
Exactly.
before.
Yes, yes, 100%.
You were talking earlier about nurse leaders and what nurse leaders should be doing. And frankly, a lot of nurse leaders and executives don't have the time. And especially in larger hospitals where there may be a larger infrastructure, what role do you see the clinical nurse specialist playing in trying to answer these questions, or other people that are really looking at the practice questions? Because frankly, if I'm a nurse executive and there's something that's broken, I, I would hope that there's a team that's trying to solve the problem and not me trying to come up with all the solutions or using generative AI. How do I, as a nurse leader, as a nurse executive, provide a framework for my team to use these tools in answering the questions themselves?
First of all, I love that question, because it sounds like a dream to me, right? Because I've never worked in an environment where I've had access to clinical nurse specialists. Particularly in my state, if you do want to become a clinical nurse specialist, you probably are going to have to do your education out of the state, because I can't even name one program that has one school that has still a CNS program. Many of the CNS that exist today and in my area either got their education from a school that no longer offers that program, or they come from out of state. And so many of our institutions don't hire CNSs here. Now, Greater New Orleans, probably very different. I don't have a perspective on that because I'm new to the area. But where I lived before, it was very rural. We were lucky if we had a CNS. But I do understand the perspective of working in these large academic centers. The nurse leader should be leading the CNSs if they are not informed about this already. So I would just think that CNSs, their primary passion is making sure that they're always evaluating evidence and making sure that it's getting into practice. And I love their model. I wish we had more CNSs. Their value can never be underappreciated, but it often is, because what we see more in APRN world today is your NPs and stuff like that. But when you have the luxury of working with a team of CNS, they may already be on top of all of this. It might be a good idea as a nurse leader to talk to, if you have the availability of CNSs that work alongside with you, to just pull them into a touch base meeting and let's just talk. Do you know about these things? Pull up the Jonah article. Let's review this together. So basically, to answer that question, I would say nurse leaders should just be informed, because they may not be the ones doing it, but they are still responsible for things when they're not done. And so this might be a good way to pull in that team.
Tell me this. What do you personally think about AI from a broader perspective?
I see it as revolutionary. I also see it with fear. I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about its infiltration. I'm concerned mostly, I know that AI is going to affect every aspect of our lives, not just nursing. But as a nurse, that's where my mind goes. How is this going to affect nursing from all aspects, from clinical nursing to academic nursing? Because we are looking at the point where what if a robot is lecturing for me from now on? Then can I make it 20 more years in academia so I can retire? I don't know. That's something that I'm worried about. That's something I think a lot of people are worried about. So I'm very worried about AI. But I think,
But you also use it.
but I use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use it. I use it. And you know why? Because I want to know what's happening.
You want
I
to be at
want,
the table, just like you were talking about earlier.
Yep. Exactly. If I don't know it, then no one's going to call me to the room and say, we need your expert opinion on this because we're making a big decision and it's going to affect nursing practice. They're not going to pull people to the room to ask them their thoughts who have never even used AI. So that's why I say proceed with caution, but don't not do it, because we are at a pivotal moment in our world and in our society and in nursing, where if we don't figure out how to be a big, loud voice in how AI is going to affect our practice moving forward, then we are going to be the ones who are going to be left scrambling with how to fix things after the fact. And we need to learn from historical lessons. Nurses should not be involved after the fact. Nursing should be involved now. So I do encourage people to get involved, read about it, learn about it, use it if you want to. That's totally up to you. There are privacy concerns, so I do understand that. But we need to start talking about it. We need to start being in the rooms with the decision makers before we are all sitting around looking at each other saying, this is terrible. This is affecting our practice and our patient care. And we didn't have a say in this. And that's what fears me the most about AI.
Using AI to close the research to practice gap has been our episode topic. Dr. Justin Fontenot, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. The article you wrote titled What Nurse Leaders Need to Know About Artificial Intelligence is available in the February 2024 edition of the Journal of Nursing Administration. And again, a link to that article is in our episode description. Justin, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, which focuses on improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and podcast guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of the guest employer, Berkeley Research Group, or their other respective employees and affiliates.